Thank you all for taking the time to join us. I am Renee, your moderator for today's panel. A little bit of housekeeping. During this seminar, please keep your microphones muted to avoid audio interference. We will have a 20-minute audience Q&A at the end of the session. If you have any questions for our panelists during the event, please submit them to Poll Everywhere at the link pollev.com/CNCF. You can upvote questions from others there as well. The link is also posted in the chat box. And if you have a particular questions for any of our panelists, please indicate the name of the panelist before your question. We have tried our best to make this panel accessible. A full transcript will be made available after. To some of us, this will be unusual, but the panelists will also take the time to describe what they are wearing and where they're currently speaking from, in addition to describing the slides they are presenting for people with visual impairment. The session will be recorded and posted on YouTube later. The NUS Center for Nature-Based Climate Solutions, a newly established center this year, aspires to be a focal point for research and thought leadership for natural climate solutions in the Asia-Pacific region. Natural climate solutions tackle climate change by protecting and better managing natural ecosystems. To kick off the seminar, please allow me to introduce myself. Again, my name is Renee Lorica. I am zooming in a maroon blouse, direct from Los Baños, Laguna, Philippines. I'm a wildlife ecologist with 16 years of experience in research, conservation, and management of wildlife in agricultural ecosystems in Asia. I acquired my PhD in agriculture, health, and environment from the University of Greenwich, and I was actively involved with the global mammals assessment of the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. I was also part of the team who drafted administrative orders concerning the trade of wild species of flora and fauna in the Philippines. Now, empowering women in science and the environment sector is a very personal issue. I hope everyone can draw insights and inspiration from today's panel. So just a little bit of a backgrounder. Despite some improvements, women remain underrepresented minorities across STEM. For example, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, a leading international source of climate science, only has around 22% of women authors. Female scientists continue to face various gender-specific challenges and barriers to career advancement. However, we know from evidence that having gender-diverse teams enhances scientific discovery and innovation. So how can we strive towards more equality and inclusivity in STEM for the benefit of all? This panel aims to stimulate contemplation and discussion around this topic. Our panelists for today will be sharing their perspectives as female scientists and change makers for about 5 minutes each. We will then proceed to a discussion for 20 minutes and finally an audience Q&A for another 20 minutes. Our first speaker, Ms. Ashley Bang, is a marine ecologist and Fulbright Research Fellow at Academia Sinica in Taipei. She is a former Noah Hawley Scholar and received her Bachelor of Science honors in Geology Biology from Brown University in 2019. Ashley is a passionate advocate of diversity in the sciences and co-founded the GEO Group at Brown University. The GEO Group provides a strong network of support for undergraduate women and underrepresented minorities. For this effort, she won the Susan Pilch Friedman Excellence Award in Women's Leadership, an award given annually to one woman in recognition of her leadership in the Brown University community. Let's hear from Ashley now.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction and for having me on this panel. I'm currently calling in from Hong Kong, where I'm sitting in my dining room in front of this lovely painting of Boston in the winter, and I'm wearing a blue shirt. And yeah, having graduated from my undergrad last May, I think I bring to this discussion, the perspective of a scientist in the relatively earlier stages of my career. And so I'm just going to spend the next few minutes talking about how I came to start the GOW Plus or Geosciences Women Plus group at Brown University. And yeah, coming into Brown, I was lucky enough to be in a really tight-knit department. But at the same time, as a very shy and impressionable first-year student, I looked around the department and saw that women were largely outnumbered by men in the geosciences. I mean, our department was doing a lot better than others, but at the same time, we only had fewer than 15% of our professors that were female, and only one of those professors was a person of color. So I was starting to doubt myself a little, but very fortunately, I was assigned a peer academic advisor that a lot of first year students are offered to gain mentorship from. And, having this advisor whose name was Grace Molino, who's a student who's 1 year ahead of me, having her there as a peer mentor and also a role model to, pave the way in the geosciences as a woman, a young woman, helped me realize that being a minority in STEM shouldn't really stop you from pushing through certain challenges unique to, say, a woman, and achieve what you set out to do. But Grace and I realized that not all undergrads were lucky enough to find these kinds of connections during their journey at Brown University. So we thought this was a great opportunity to build a network between female identifying undergrads, grad students, postdocs, who you might not really get the chance to encounter within a more formal classroom setting or, say, at large department-wide socials. And beyond that, we also founded the group not with the intention, of course, of being, some sort of girls only club. We definitely wanted to provide an intersectional community for other underrepresented minorities in the geosciences to A, connect with one another, and B, have a platform and a safe space to bring to light the issues that we collectively face as a community that we might not have been aware of as individuals. And so, that plus sign really stand in the logo there, really stands for the inclusive nature of the group. And throughout the 2 years that I was leading the group from its inception, we organized a bunch of different events, ranging from things like casual study breaks where we had grad students bring their dogs, we had coloring books and snacks, to just spend an hour a week to, not stress about midterms or conference deadlines or whatever it was, to more formal events such as panels where we brought on our 4 female identifying professors who were available at the time to hear about the sobering challenges and experiences that they face in academia to reach the positions they're in as tenured faculty, and hear about what they've endured or gone through to pave the way for us younger students. And so, yeah, on the slide here, I've included some photos of our events and our community, lovely community. And yeah, since then, Grace and I have graduated, of course, but it's been so amazing to see the group continue on with new undergrads and grad students taking up leadership positions. And at least for me, I think it was a really rewarding way to step out of my comfort zone and challenge myself as a leader, and also learn how to proactively educate myself about issues that different minorities face in STEM, not just issues that are personal to myself. And of course, most importantly, it was really great to see the bonds that the group has fostered across the geo community at the university, and I hope will continue to do so for the years to come. So I think that was kind of my 5-minute spiel, so I'll hand it back to Renee. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Your work is inspiring. Now let's hear from our second speaker, Debbie Ng. Ms. Ng is a wildlife disease ecologist. She is a co-founder of the Himalayan Mutt Project, a community-led effort addressing infectious diseases in wild and domestic animals in Nepal. Debbie also founded the Hantu blog, a volunteer organization that aims to enhance ocean literacy and engages private and government stakeholders to conserve coral reefs in Singapore. She loves exploring our world through mountain biking, hiking, bird watching, and interviewing women in STEM for her YouTube channel. Debbie, please.
Thank you, Renee, for that introduction, and thanks for having me on today's panel. So I'm Debbie, and I'm wearing a blue shirt. I'm coming to you from Singapore in my apartment. I would like to share this privilege that I have today to be on this panel with some of the women whom I've met through the course of my work, whom do not yet have the privilege to be here. For many of the women, the challenge is not so much to get involved in STEM, but to stay involved. The stories I'll be sharing will give examples of some of the barriers of some of the women I've met have overcome to stay in STEM. So when I decided to pursue science, I only had to ask myself if I was interested. My first biology teacher was a woman, and she was a wonderful role model. Renee, next slide, please. These choices which I were able to make are less accessible for women in Nepal, for example. This is a photo of Rabina, a young woman I met in Kathmandu, and she has to walk along a trail to get to school every day, to school and back. The dangers of doing this alone, especially in the twilight hours of a short winter day, could be enough for her family to tell her not to go to school. Squeezing on a crowded bus, not being able to wander further than the edge of the district, even taking a taxi alone, are barriers for women who have a passion for science. Whether they are girls in school or women doing field work in remote locations, they can't work as hard as their male counterparts if they don't feel safe. And institutions can play a role. A good friend of mine, Isana Thapa, is a biologist with bird conservation in Nepal. And when she has to work late for projects or attend meetings and conferences outside of the city, her organization keeps her and her other female colleagues safe by hiring a private bus. Feeling safe keeps women in STEM. But even where safety isn't a concern, the ability to participate completely, or at least as much as their male counterparts, is hampered by obligations to fulfill responsibilities required by a wife, a daughter, a teacher, a housekeeper, a mother. Renee, next slide, please. This is Shahana Praveen. So the photograph here is showing her carrying her young daughter, 6-month-old daughter, in the middle of a disease outbreak in Bangladesh. Shahana carried her daughter into the field, not knowing what kind of disease was emerging in this location that was killing 7 out of 10 people that were infected. This disease was later identified as the first human-to-human transmission of Nipah in Bangladesh. Shahana tells me she could not have done this work without the support of her family. This work meaning continuing field work with her child in tow in the middle of an emerging infectious disease outbreak. So I asked Shahana how they supported her, and she said, they did not stop me. But Shahana is lucky. She works at the International Center for Diarrheal Disease Research, and they provided her dependent support by giving her a budget to hire a nanny when she was in the field, and an air ticket for her child to join her at another outbreak investigation. When women have mobility, they can participate and be present. They can remain visible to their seniors and peers, and be present to receive opportunities which are too often given away to men simply because the women cannot be there. And no matter how hardworking, creative, or intelligent a woman is, these alone, her strengths alone, won't close the gap on female representation in science unless we have institutional and government support. In South Asia, 4 out of 5 researchers in STEM are men. In Bangladesh, 9 out of 10 senior academics in leading institutions are men. These are big gaps. To enhance the role of women, we have to work with their communities and challenge both men and women to question their experience of gender stereotypes. Renee, next slide, please. This is Shanta, also from Nepal. She was a hardworking, creative, and intelligent girl, the brightest in her village. She won a scholarship to a private school in Nepal. Her favorite subjects were physics and math. She wanted to be a teacher so that she could share her skills and passion with other girls. But Shanta's community was not ready for a successful girl, a girl who was not afraid to speak her mind, to share what she had learned. You see, Shanta was a Dalit, a caste of untouchable people, the lowest member of society. Shanta attempted to teach her family and neighbors about hygiene and how to read, but she was ridiculed, told to give up, that education on a Dalit girl was a waste of resources. At 18, Shanta took her own life because she could no longer bear the burden. The challenges and the interface to overcome these gender barriers are complex, and we cannot try to simplify them. Women and girls need support from their community, and this means their family, the institutions around them, and government. Without all of these working together, no matter how hardworking or intelligent or creative she is, the opportunities will remain beyond her grasp. So I borrow the words from Ravi Verma: men have to take initiative because they are in those positions of leadership and power. Men need to reconcile that empowering women is not a zero-sum game. Think of Malala Yousafzai and her father Zayuddin Yousafzai, Jane Goodall and Louis Leakey. If every girl who was interested in science found someone to support her in that interest, we could have a tipping point. So I invite men to ask these questions. How can we provide safety, support, and for mobility for women? Thanks, Renee.
Thank you so much, Debbie. That was, wow, eye-opening and very moving. Moving on to our last speaker, Dr. Kelly Simon. Dr. Simon is currently the Ohio Coastal Resiliency, Biomimicry, and Innovation Fellow at the University of Akron. Kelly was previously a Senior Research Fellow at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore and the Managing Director of the Pacific Voyagers Foundation, which focused on climate change in the Pacific Islands. She is also parent to 11-year-old Olivia, who aspires to be a horticulturist with a PhD. Olivia earned her first grant of $2,000 to make her school biophilic when she was just in second grade. Very impressive. So, Kelly, please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm coming in to you from Ohio in the United States. For my home office, I have a really nice colorful background of the watersheds of the Great Lakes and a bunch of plants that my daughter Olivia has rescued. And I'm also wearing a white shirt with black script text that says Cite Black Women. I'm going to focus on the leaky pipeline in STEM with the aim to get people to think a bit differently or critically about systemic barriers. Now, the data I'll show will be US-centric, but it's important as a collective that we all understand not just what keeps women and girls out of STEM in the first place, but how we can break those barriers down and support women. In the US, largely that's systemic racism, where STEM initiatives have overwhelmingly been successful for white women. But as a start, let's take a look at how girls self-select themselves out of STEM careers because of how we're spoken to from such a young age. Renee, the video, please.
Who's my pretty girl? 9, 10, 11. Sammy, sweetie, don't get your dress dirty.
Sam, honey, you don't want to mess with that. Let's put him down.
Samantha, this project has gotten out of control.
Whoa, hey, careful with that. Why don't you hand that to your brother?
Our words can have a huge impact. Isn't it time we told her she's pretty brilliant too? Encourage her love of science and technology and inspire her to change the world.
Thank you, Renee. Next slide. That's not an endorsement of Verizon. Not an endorsement of Verizon, but I like the message quite a bit. And so once we haven't self-selected out of STEM from childhood, there are a whole host of other barriers to overcome once you're actually in a STEM field. I personally have experienced 6 of these 7, sometimes many times over, and sometimes that limits a lot of what you do in choosing, in the decisions that you make of who to work with, where to work, which jobs you take. I obviously have not been Black in America. That is a privilege that I definitely, acknowledge. I would encourage everybody to go onto Twitter and just look through the hashtag Black in the Ivory for some incredible stories of just being Black in academia and the subtle and both overt racism that is experienced. Really amazing stories. Next slide, please. But there's some good news. So we women are super tough and resilient and persistent. And across the board, this is charts from the NSF, the National Science Foundation Directorates here in the US. And submission rates across the board are increasing, particularly well in the geosciences. And the chart on the left with the highest rates of submission, that's the social sciences, where there's a higher ratio of women to men in the first place. And what you see is, there really is, at the highest point, only about 35%. So that's submission rate, not acceptance rate, and that's in the social sciences. So Renee, next slide, please. Thank you. So those of us that have pushed through and obtained the PhD in STEM, what does that look like in America? Well, this is where gender and racial disparity can really be seen. Asian women are the most prevalent doctoral holder behind white people, and that is at 4.6%, 4.6 behind 78 collective of white people in America. And Black women, 2.7%. So when we're talking about eliminating one of those barriers of having a role model, there's a huge gap that we can fill. Renee, next slide, please. Now, this data was all pre-COVID. But do you know where productivity across the board tanked globally during lockdown? Nobody gets points for this because the answer is women. Women's productivity absolutely tanked across the board. And women have, from the very start of the semester, are likely burnt out from child and elder care and have little energy or concentration left for research. But compound this with how COVID has hit our Black and brown and Native American communities in the United States, where the populations have disproportionately been hit the hardest with COVID. I suspect the research output is even lower, but the data are not out for this just yet. Renee, next slide, please. So output isn't just tanking in the US. In fact, this study looks at 25 countries. 21 out of the 25 countries in the study see a drop in female academic research productivity. Now, if you'll notice at the very bottom, Singapore comes out on top. Well done, Singapore, with an increase. And I suspect there's probably a lot of childcare issues that there's a lot of familial support and childcare support that comes along with that as well. And so one more slide, slide 8, please. So what can you do to stop this leaky pipeline? Well, you be mindful of your words from the very start of how you talk to kids. Not just girls, but boys as well. Be gender inclusive. Support the intrinsic inquisitive nature. And if you're positioned to nurture and culture the support and acceptance, it makes a huge difference in not only supporting women and girls in STEM, but keeping women and girls in STEM. And last but not least, check your privilege, be mindful of where you can support others, and do so if you can. And decolonize your thoughts, decolonize your syllabus, decolonize your readings, and cite Black women. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for that very insightful thoughts. And now that we have heard from all of our panelists, we will be proceeding with the discussion. Again, I'm Renee. I would like to start by asking Ashley a question. So Ashley, how did creating a strong peer network help female undergraduates and underrepresented minorities in their journey through the university?
Sure, that's a great question. And I think Kelly and Debbie have kind of touched upon it during their own speeches. And so in the Brown University community, I think one of the key outcomes was in our group was fostering more opportunities for mentorship and just interaction in general amongst women and other underrepresented minorities in the department. And, you know, just for myself, for my personal experience, as I mentioned, it's just so uplifting to have a role model who you identify with in more than just an academic sense. And seeing someone in a place that you want to be in the future can be the difference between an aspiring scientist deciding, oh, you know, maybe this isn't the place for me, or I don't really fit in here, to, yes, actually, I want to pursue this career path, and there are people who have been there before me kind of paved the way. And at least this was the case for me. And I think knowing that you're not alone in the struggles that you face was a really important aspect of building this network. And, you know, in terms of connecting the community and opening up discussions about topics that have traditionally been excluded from the research circle, I think this is another aspect that was really intriguing for the group to kind of pioneer. And I think we, in some of our discussions with female professors who are mothers themselves, we brought them in to just talk very casually about how do you even have kids and pursue academia. It was something I hadn't thought about, but clearly many women have been doing it for a long time, kind of under the radar. And, you know, it shouldn't be that way. And I think just opening up those kinds of discussions was really eye-opening, at least for me and other younger students. And, you know, beyond that, talking to other grad students and postdocs who are just a couple steps ahead in terms of what do you expect going to your first conference? What even is business casual attire for women especially? Literally be anything, I think. And yeah, so just opening these avenues for discussion, I think really helped bring out the bonds that were already existing within our geoscience community at Brown University. And it really helped guide the undergrads throughout their journey.
Wow, thank you, Ashley. I hope other women in other undergrads also have that sort of opportunity that you have. And I hope our audience who are in the more senior positions who are listening to us right now would also make that kind of effort for their undergraduate students, you know, to mentor and to guide. My next question is for Debbie. You know, Shanta's story is really sad, and to be honest, it makes me angry that something like that should happen to her. You mentioned earlier that to succeed, support must come from family, community, institutions, and government. How can we do this if it's the culture itself that prevents us from addressing that situation?
Thanks, Renee, for your question. You're right. It's sad, and I did debate, like, you know, whether it was too sad to share, but I think it's important that we hear this story because she really wanted to go to school. And one of the things that I learned from one of the veteran female educators in Nepal, I'll never forget this thing that she said. She said, the girls here, they are so thirsty for education. So if we just open that gate, lifted that barrier, they will be there, but we need to lift that barrier. And I think it's important we recognize the whole point of Shanta's story is that there's no one size fits all template. It's not just give them scholarships, put them in school, or you know, that you really have to support the community. We have to explain the value of education, and that's one of the things that still needs to be overcome. The communities must be involved, not just the individuals, and men must be engaged. Shanta's story isn't just sad because of what happened to Shanta. After her suicide, her brother actually fell into depression. As a man, he had to suddenly bear all the burden of leaving the village to work in the city. Men suffer the impacts of inequality too. And the culture that we are trying to change, I think the wonderful thing about culture is that we created it so we can recreate it. Men need to get involved in the gender debate, especially in STEM. Most senior, as you mentioned, as we have seen, most senior academic positions are held by men. And this also makes them mentors, role models. Like Kelly was saying, the words they use to their colleagues, to their students, they possess the power to challenge those stereotypes. But possessing the power isn't enough. That power needs to be exercised. And the culture isn't just, I know I've given examples from South Asia, but really, unfortunately, it is global. So as we all listen to these stories, I really hope that we don't think that this is something that's happening somewhere else. It's actually happening right in front of us.
Thank you, Debbie. That was very challenging. This next question I have is for Kelly, but it's also sort of related to that other question I asked Debbie earlier. Kelly, to me, you're a cool mom, you know, because Olivia was very lucky to have you and to have all that opportunity open to her. But as we've seen in that Verizon video, not all girls have that. And to get them interested in STEM, it seems like we have to start them young, don't we? As you've obviously done with Olivia. So how do you get parents, the community, to foster the love of science in children, especially girls, given inherent biases that's rooted in the culture?
There's thanks for that, Renee. Olivia will probably not say that I'm cool, like she's called me lame multiple times, but you know, that's another story. Yeah, she doesn't know how cool I am just yet, but you know, there's different scales at which to teach and support girls, especially. In our home, it's basically one giant art and science project. We have, you know, she has a ton of plants. We support her propagation and love of plants, obviously, but it's a jungle in our house. And there's rehab centers, and she's built irrigation channels because she didn't want to put in the work to actually water every single one. So instead she built an irrigation channel and experimented on a carpet to see if it would work. So we support that, like, you know, and we support her going out, get her clothes dirty. I talk about the science of getting your hands in the soil and the microbes and how it boosts your immune system. And so from a very young age, I've encouraged her, go out and get dirty. Go out and just experiment. But at school, I've talked to the teachers. You know, that in the Verizon commercial, it said 66% of girls kind of start to lose interest at around 4th grade. Well, she was in 4th grade last year. And I went in there and I was that mom that just said, what are you doing in science to support gender equality? What are you doing? How are you talking to the girls? And I'm very lucky that at her school, they're aware of the statistics. And so they definitely support the girls in STEM, and they give them extra projects if they ask for it. So, you know, and then tertiarily to that, I have had a very, very lucky PhD institution where I had to make sure that they were supportive, that I had a family, and they were. And I would not have been able to get my PhD if I was not able to bring Olivia into the lab on the weekends, in the evening, after school. And they engaged her. And they said, hey, Olivia, I've got this really cool thing. Do you want to see it? And she's like, cool. So exposing kids to that when you have that opportunity, I would bring her to the lab often because I knew that people there loved seeing a kid and engaging a kid and showing her different things. So, you know, and then there's another university here that has a kids STEM carnival every year. We have brought her there every single year except for the past year. So I am actively, I call this my hobby. It's basically just to keep her interested in STEM initiatives. So it's a lot of work. It's hard parenting, and it's hard to parent a girl with societal pressures. but you've got to put the time in, and you've got to find those outlets and the people especially who are supportive of those.
Thank you for that, Kelly. I hope some of the parents right now who are listening will do something like that. And hopefully those opportunities are also available to you, as it has been for Kelly and Olivia, both. Now, this next question I'm going to ask, and anybody could take up answering it. Why is it that we see fewer females in leadership positions in academia, other institutions, even corporations? And what can be done to address that?
No, I'll take a crack at that. You know, in one of my slides, you have all of those barriers. Each of those is something that you have to overcome to be in a position of leadership. There's another study that I recently came across that says your name on a resume matters. If you have an ethnic sounding name or a female sounding name, or in America, if you are Asian and Black sounding name, especially, then you are less likely to get a call back. If you put your name as a gender neutral, as if your name is Alexandra, but you put Alex, then the incidences of having a callback or an interview rise. So there's a self-selection that's an obvious bias in terms of even just your name. So wow. There's a lot that can be done in terms of checking your own biases with whom you select. So, you know, all of these barriers, they all add up. And once you get to the top, there aren't too many.
If I may just chime in, since Kelly was talking about the barriers at different levels. My experience having worked with female education in Nepal is mostly with girls at the lower levels, the challenges that they have. And the dropout rate for girls in primary school is about 50%. Depending on the community, they could drop out for a variety of reasons. It could be early marriage, it could be parental superstitions, it could be caste, it could be parents have a limited budget, and if they have a son, they would then stop at primary education for the daughter and invest in the son's education. So there are a whole bunch of effects that could be a reason for girls to drop out. And one of the most important things, and also mentioned earlier, is the lack of awareness by parents of the value of education of both sons and daughters. So they see the value of educating boys, but not of girls. And to just like return to the culture question earlier, and also on some very basic infrastructure barriers that girls encounter in schools throughout South Asia when they reach, and also to touch, I think this touches a bit on what Ashley was talking about earlier, was having role models. As the girls get older and as other girls around them start to drop out of school, they see less people like them in the classroom. There are no female teachers, there are no female peers. And there's a lot of pressure and hard to relate or find a group to socialize with, especially in South Asia, where you can't just hang out. A girl would not be appropriate to hang out with a group of boys. And so they just start to leave for these kind of social cultural reasons. Girls also drop out when they reach puberty because they don't feel comfortable in the classroom. They don't feel, these are actually been reported for reasons why they drop out of school forever. Because they can't find a bathroom that gives them privacy, and so they leave school. And so these are things that, while we are addressing some of the, we are addressing some of the issues happening in institutions, there are some things also in infrastructure right in front of us that need to be addressed at the same time. And it's important to be aware of that they need to feel safe. And about women in leadership, when I was talking to Shahana, so Shahana was the anthropologist who carried her daughter into the middle of an infectious disease outbreak twice. And And she shared that one of the challenges that she's encountered in Bangladesh is the existence of these all boys clubs in academia. A woman can't get her foot in, or it's just very uncomfortable. It usually happens after work, late at night, when a woman has to go back to the home and fulfill all of her 5 or 6 duties, responsibilities. So these are some of the social cultural barriers as well. Again, so men have to be more inclusive. How do we be more flexible with, like, if we are trying to create opportunities where we can mingle after work to interact and talk about opportunities for careers, how can we make these opportunities accessible for women to participate in, bearing in mind all the other responsibilities that they have to fulfill? So that flexibility, it should not be perceived as an inconvenience, which it seems now. You know, you have this extra responsibility, that's too bad for you. But how can we accommodate all the other responsibilities that you need to fulfill?
Wow, thank you, Debbie. It's so good that you highlighted, you know, that there's what Kelly said about institutional barriers, and then there are these also basic infrastructure. I mean, seemingly basic for a lot of countries, probably, but for some countries, especially in South Asia, they're not that basic actually, and you know, just these infrastructure. Are we going to be taking questions in from the audience now, Junji?
Yeah, so the audience, we invite you to either unmute yourself and ask the questions, or you can submit the questions at the Poll Everywhere link that was shown. There's no questions at the moment, but let me just flash it. Or Renee, do you want to continue?
There is someone here at the group chat who asked a question for our panelists.
Okay.
Can I go ahead with that
Yeah,
one?
sure.
So Miss Barbara was asking, she says, "Hi all, maybe I missed this, but you mentioned this will be a series. Do you know what the other topics will be? I'm also curious what made you choose this topic as the first one. Will gender equality be one of the research areas for the Center for Nature-Based Climate Solutions, since climate change hits women harder too?" Wow, this is a very good question. Panelists?
Oh, I can start that, I suppose. So as we are a brand new center, I think intersectionality is key, especially with climate change. So gender parity, gender equity will inevitably be part of that socio-ecological research that we do. And I, for one, have a keen interest in it. And specifically, it relates perfectly to climate change, because in Project Drawdown, where we quantified the top 100 already available solutions to climate change, both educating girls and family planning, you combine those two, and it's the #1 thing that you can do for climate change, to draw down carbon. And so, it is an intrinsic part of looking at climate change solutions. Yep.
And I think in terms of what other topics are going to be in this series, I'm going to defer that to Zhang Jie, who is one of our wonderful coordinators for this whole seminar series. I'm just a mere panelist, so I'm not too sure about the future of the series.
All right, thank you for asking that questions. So this is actually our second panel. In the previous panel, we have another speaker talking about nature conservations, and we have other series of themes coming up in carbon finance, in policies and governance relevant to climate science, and a range of other exciting topics, and really diverse speakers. And as to whether gender equality will be part of the center's research topic, we have some of our PIs in this room as well. Perhaps some of the PI want to answer these questions. other, or we also have other researchers from the center in this room. Do you want to address that, Kelly?
JJ, can you repeat that, please?
I think the question was whether gender equality will be a research directions that the center will take.
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, I don't know if it's going to be like a direct focus, but as all the research is interdisciplinary and certainly intersectional with sociocultural, socio-ecological issues, then yes, I think it's inevitable that we certainly do partner with those that do know gender issues. And because educating girls and family planning is such a pivotal part of solving climate change, or finding those solutions to climate change, then I can easily see the center is taking some of this research.
And if I may just elaborate on what Kelly was saying. Yeah, so focusing on the education is important, but I think also because the center is looking at nature-based climate solutions, that it's very essential that as we move forward, that we are cognizant of the differences between the different ways that different genders perceive our environment, the different responsibilities that we have for our environment. So in South Asia, for example, women are often at the front lines of human-wildlife conflict. They are in charge of managing resources, and also now increasingly taken on the role of transforming and rehabilitating landscapes. And so this is, I think it's useful for researchers, so looking at the different dimensions on how to be aware and see how women play, the role that women play in these landscapes, how policies affect different genders differently, how the solutions that we're trying to implement will impact genders differently. And that's definitely a strength, as Kelly said, the intersectionality of these challenges.
Thank you, Kelly, Debbie, Genji, and Ashley for addressing that question. We now have a couple of questions that came in through Poll EV, and the first one, you probably, okay, that changed. So in what way have you personally experienced gender inequality in academia, and how did you overcome it? Any one of you could answer that question.
I guess I'll speak a bit about my personal experience. I was very privileged to grow up in a family where pursuing a career in STEM was very, very much encouraged and celebrated. But as somebody who likes being outdoors and getting my hands dirty, I've always been interested in doing field work for a lot of my undergraduate career. And something that I've constantly heard is essentially it boils down to, women aren't as strong as men, or, aren't as suited to being out in the field or roughing it out. And this is something I've heard, in a joking context, obviously not in a malicious way, but, inherently I think that, hearing these comments can oftentimes, waver your confidence if you don't have a support system around you. And, I'm also well aware that I'm no Olympic power lifter by any means, but sometimes, being brute strength isn't the only advantage in fieldwork or skill necessary in fieldwork. And I'll just, there was one time when I was working in the field in Alaska where we were surveying juvenile salmon near shore. And I was actually the only one who was able to sit on the back of this tiny boat and deploy the net. Otherwise, the balance of the ship would have been thrown off, and I was able to get the timing because apparently my hand-eye coordination is adequate. But this is just one of and it's just an example of how brute strength isn't everything. Sometimes it requires I mean, obviously in most groups, having a diversity is very much an advantage of having people who are strong enough to pull in the net, but also having tiny people who can throw the net off the boat. And so I think this is just one example of sometimes there are inherent societal expectations of, women not wanting to get their hands dirty, or like, oh, we can't not shower for a day or something like that. And, taking time to break down those inherent biases and encourage people to, pursue careers or take roles that they wouldn't traditionally be encouraged to do.
I'll chime in as well. I've experienced a lot. And it really is persistence, and I think just inherent in my nature of being stubborn to keep going, even when I wanted to quit. I did not have a family that supported STEM initiatives. And in fact, my grandfather growing up, I wanted to be a pilot. So I said, I want to learn to fly. And he goes, girls can't be pilots. You're, just stay on the ground. You have your head into the clouds. So what I did was I paid for my own flight lessons in high school. And so I was like, nobody's going to tell me what to do. And so I think if I didn't have that persistent nature or just proving people wrong, ultimately I did self-select out of the sciences. And it took a while to get my confidence back up to go back to school and get my master's and PhD in STEM. And so, if women actually do persist and get into these STEM careers, it might be years later, after they've overcome a lot of these other barriers.
Well, thank you, Kelly. Debbie, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I could really relate to Kelly's experience, because I went through a little bit similar experience. As you shared at the beginning of the talk, I really enjoy hiking, mountain biking, all that sort of thing. I was told to stop all of that. I was told that all of that, you don't do that. If you're a girl, you're not going to find a partner if you continue doing those things. Yeah, I guess similar to Kelly, I was just like, this is too great for me to stop. So, but I would also like to share some of the experiences that I have witnessed, and maybe also I think this is quite inspiring. So when I was doing field work in the Himalaya, I really try to get as many women on board as possible. It's actually quite hard because as we saw the figures earlier, there are just very few women professionally in STEM. We have a lot of people in undergraduate, but not so much working. But when I do get female doctors, veterinarians, technicians along on the team, we see these the people in the community, which can be both men and women, little girls and boys. And often, so similar to Ashley with the salmon, because we handle wildlife, dogs, some large dogs. It could be 40-kilo dogs, 50-kilo dogs. And often we're told to stay away because the dogs are dangerous, they're gonna bite you. And it's always fantastic when I see my two female technicians handle the animal perfectly. Everyone's going, how did they do that? And without any brute force. And we had one situation where a little girl came forward, and so we were doing a surgery on an animal, and she asked if that person at the table was a doctor, and we said yes, it's a doctor. And she said, there are women doctors? And I think just because these are very rural Himalayan villages, and the doctors that they have seen are probably men. And so it's really wonderful to have that opportunity. And I think when we're talking about representation, when we're building our teams as researchers, as PIs, when we are building our teams, every time we go out into the field, particularly in countries where women may be more marginalized, how can we be role models as teams? When we are in the team, how do we present ourselves as interacting with other women in the team? How do we build our team and show, as Ashley said, that we can capitalize on different strengths? So it's really a lot about the presence when we are present. How do we represent ourselves both as men and as women?
You know, this is a very interesting discussion we're having here. And as we're having this discussion, another discussion is actually going on in our chat box. And I'm just going to read two last questions because we're already almost close to our time limit. But there's a couple of questions here that I want to read. And the first one was from Ms. Bhavani Prakash. She says, as a woman, I fell off a conventional career path because of a lack of quality part-time jobs when I needed to bring up my children. How can this be addressed systemically to encourage women to stay in touch with their careers and come back in full swing when they are more ready? Ladies?
Childcare. 100% the answer is childcare, whether that is, you know, the village you create or the village, the literal village. But as we're seeing here in the United States with COVID especially, you know, the household and full-time career duties are falling disproportionately on women. And that is, we do not have the childcare structurally, institutionally and structurally, nor is it affordable. And so, you know, it's been very apparent that childcare is pretty much the #1 thing that you could do, at least in America, to support women. And for me, I had to make sure, I interviewed my PhD department to make sure that kids were allowed on campus and that they'd be welcome in the lab. Because if I didn't have that childcare support of the entire, of my entire village that I created, then I would not have been able to complete it. And if you saw the picture of my daughter, there's 3 pictures. The one on the right, when she's with an Australian tree fern, that was, the guy behind that was my advisor, Dr. Peter Neverovsky, and he was buying her that plant because he had Olivia ultimately say, hey, can you know, we're losing this PhD project that Ari has, and we can't keep the plants alive, and nor can we find enough mulberry trees. Can you take the summer and find them? And she wound up saving that, you know, that PhD project, and she just graduated as well. And so that was the thank you from the department, was that they bought her a plant. But, you know, it comes back around that you support them, but the kids can also really kind of contribute back as well. But childcare, for sure.
Thank you, Kelly.
Oh, sorry.
Ashley, go ahead.
I'm not a mother. All I have are cats and plants. But I think one thing I wanted to mention with regards to this question is that for younger scientists such as myself, I think that there's still this inherent expectation, especially within Asian and East Asian culture, that your career, especially for women, is sometimes just a placeholder until you reach your ultimate purpose, which under the eyes of many traditional Asians is getting married and having children. And I think it would be really, it's really important to kind of instigate a change in this mentality where, you know, settling down and starting a family is not necessarily ingrained in the future of all women. And I also think that institutions can do more to realize that that having a successful career and also having a family are definitely not mutually exclusive, as you know, we've seen through Kelly's amazing efforts. And it shouldn't be an ultimatum that only women are unfairly presented with. And I also want to mention that there are some institutions still, at least in North America, and I'm sure in other places, that only offer maternity leave and not paternity leave, as if, you know, men are supposed to be these workaholics that aren't supposed to care or even participate in the rearing of their children during work hours. And so I think the sooner that we realize that in general, it's very human to have a life or family outside of your career, but at the same time, it's not something that all women or people in general are prescribed to do. I think the sooner we can dissolve these unfair societal expectations and, you know, encourage women to come back to a career in STEM or enter a career in STEM without feeling like they're being held back by some sort of guilt or expectation.
Right, thank you, Ashley and Kelly. So now I'm going to turn to this discussion that's happening in the chat. And I'm just going to ask I'm just going to get to the question. Ms. Coleman was asking, do you agree that women are conditioned to be less self-confident, i.e. over our entire lives, being taught that our self-worth is linked to how others, especially men, perceive us? If you do agree, then do you agree with Kelly's assertion that it comes down to a great degree to parents?
So I'll take a stab at that. So for the first part of the question, it's very societal and cultural as well. I have a picture that I took in an airport of a magazine rack, and it was labeled girls and boys. And the girls section was all about makeup and beauty, and the boys was about space and science and cool things like cars. So, you know, it's these visualizations, not just the auditory cues that we're getting from parents, from school, but it's also from society as well. So I can't claim 100% that, you know, it's just due to my effort that Olivia's into this. I have had to fight those stereotypes, and we've had a lot of frank discussions about beauty standards, about what it means to be a strong person, what it means to be a healthy person, because by the age of 9, girls especially want to go on a diet, at least in North America, at 9 years old. And so it's constantly being aware of these socio-cultural perceptions and the bombardment, whether it's completely explicit or implicit, of what these girls are getting, and having frank conversations. So it's an uphill battle. And I don't know if I'll succeed. I don't know. But I feel like I am now, because I feel like it's another full-time job of, you know, letting her be a kid and exploring the science that she loves.
If I can just chime in on the Joanna's question on how men perceive us. I feel that men also bear the burden of gender stereotypes. They have to be masculine, aggressive, women have to be submissive. In the end, it becomes also how we perceive ourselves. So as Kelly was saying, both men and women, boys and girls, receive these cues from a very young age. It's harder for a boy to tell the world, I want to be a ballet dancer, for example. And how can we make that possible? How can we make it safe for both boys and girls, boys to be vulnerable and for girls to be strong? I think that, yeah, like Kelly was saying, it's not just those cues that we see all around us. They frame us in the beginning. Someone is telling it to us, and then eventually it becomes our reality. And this is how I've seen it for many of the young girls that I've met and worked with in Nepal. It got to a point where I was trying to convince them that they could do things because they have been told for so long that they couldn't do those things. And when you go through generations of that, you're no longer actually you don't even have to feed it to them anymore. It becomes a reality. So then how do we get them out of that reality? And I think many of the instruments that Kelly and Ashley have raised build chipping away at these barriers, both for men and for women.
Right. So unfortunately, that is all the time we have to do. We actually ran out of time, but that's all right, because we were having this really wonderful discussion, and we still have a few questions that we haven't answered. So what we're going to do is, as soon as we have the transcription, we're going to include there the answers to the questions. We're going to have our panelists answer those questions that have not been answered during this session, and we will be sending you all that in your email. So hopefully we have provided some food for thought on the unique issues that affect women in STEM and opportunities to overcome these challenges. Hopefully what has been shared today inspires the women and the men in our audience to actively build more inclusive and equal workspaces and decision-making processes, as well as inspire girls and women to take on more leadership roles in the environmental sciences and the other fields in STEM. Before we end, if everyone is all right, if you could please turn on your videos for just a really quick photo. Jumji will be taking care of that for us. Audience, would you allow us to take a photo of you guys? Jumji, let us know.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for people to turn on their camera. Thank you so much for being here, and it's so uplifting and empowering to see so many people caring about these very important issues. Okay, yeah, we are waiting for a couple more, and if you're comfortable, you can turn on. Just keep staring at the screen and put on a smile when I take the photos.
Yeah,
And
just let us know.
scroll through. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay. One more, and just keep smiling. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Let me just check if I got it.
Okay.
And I just wanted to add really quickly, I think we focused our discussion mainly on, you know, binary gender roles, but I also just wanted to put in a reminder that gender is a fluid spectrum. And, you know, I think a lot of our discussion also pertains to people who don't identify necessarily as male or female, or man or woman.
Thank you, Ashley, for reminding us of that. So panelists, audience, thank you so much for taking the time today to share your thoughts, your insights, your experiences with all of us. And we hope to see you at our next seminar. Again, we will be sending everyone the resources our speakers shared, along with more readings and videos to keep this conversation going. Thank you all. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.